chairperson of the National Transitional Justice Working Group. I am sure that some of you might be familiar with the National Transitional Working Group because it was an outcome of a meeting of civic organizations that met in Yanga some 5-6 years ago and decided we needed in our country processes of transition that would enable us as a country to turn our backs on the past. Today's meeting, for instance, is a series of dialogues that we, this National Transitional Justice Working Group, will organize to bring Zimbabweans together, dialogue about a series of issues that require our attention as citizens. The dialogues that we will be organizing will assist us as Zimbabweans learn from what other people in the region have gone through. It will also enable us as Zimbabweans to talk amongst ourselves with one aim and one motivation. We have only one country, and that country is Zimbabwe. We are all citizens of that country. We cannot afford to outsource the processes of getting it right. And the only way we are going to get it right is if we ourselves, amongst ourselves, find the energy, find the courage, find the tolerance to talk amongst ourselves.
Thank you very much, Mr. Martin, for his overstated eloquence about who I am. I'm just a mere Zimbabwean with nothing to my name except the name itself. That's all that I own under the sun. As for the other issues he was talking about, I think he witnessed someone else in action, not me. I will be talking about national dialogue, specifically looking at the Zimbabwean experience and prospects for the future. And in that regard, I would want to start by giving you a quotation by one of the world's erstwhile products, Albert Einstein. And he said, and I quote, "Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding." Peace cannot be kept by force, but it can only be achieved by understanding. That is the premise on which I understand national dialogue and what it is all about. And in that regard, I would want us to take note that when we're talking about Zimbabwe and what it has gone through, we want to understand that, like Mr. Nyati highlighted, we are looking at a state that has been through a lot. Specifically, I identified 4 epochs that define what Zimbabwe is today. Zimbabwe is a genealogy of a violent pre-colonial past, characterized by interstate, interclan conflicts, ranging across state borders, etc. We have got a very violent colonial past, characterized by primitive accumulation, characterized by violence, which I would like to pinpoint from the word go that violence has been a weapon of choice for Zimbabwean government from 1965 with the declaration of UDI. The third epoch that I would want us to take note of is the liberation struggle, which was very violent, characterized by racial, ethnic, and armed violence. Armed violence that was characterized by intra-party violence, inter-party violence, and the armed struggle itself that we know of, where Zanla and Zimbabwe waged a struggle against the Rhodesian regime. I want to start from the end, 22 January 2019, where His Excellency President Mnangagwa made a clarion call for national dialogue. He made a call for a national dialogue platform, which to me was motivated by an understanding that our dialogue is the one and only way out for Zimbabwe. Dialogue is the only way we can actually confront our past and get to grips with it. And actually at the end of the day be able to define who we are and who we want to be. But unfortunately, in that regard, I would want us to look at how best to confront our violent past from a theoretical perspective, first and foremost, which is where I will later on indicate errors that have been made in all past dialogic processes in Zimbabwe. Where I will look at the two prominent authorities, Hema et al. And Lederach. Hema et al. Look at peace initiatives as necessitating an involvement of not just political leaders, but of everyone across the breadth and width of any society. Because it is the common men and women who are most affected by the outcomes of any dialogic process. Later I will tell you that for any peace to be sustainable, it should be grassroots based. Long-term peace can only be achieved through an inclusive process that is bottom-up, grassroots-based, inclusive, and all-encompassing. And you'll agree with me that is not been the case in Zimbabwe. And that is where we have been failing. Right. When I look at national dialogue, I'm looking at processes that are nationally owned. Processes that aim at generating consensus. Processes that aim at averting violence. Processes that are stakeholder driven. Processes that are inclusive. I'm looking at a peace building instrument which in the long term seeks to build trust and confidence between and amongst the participants. There is no way you can talk to someone if you don't trust them. There is no way you can have a conversation with someone if you don't have confidence in them. That's what national dialogue is all about. It seeks to inculcate, to foster inclusive participation across any divides, be they political, be they racial, be they social, economic. It is as a way of consensus building, especially in a period in which we are as Zimbabwe, a period of transition. Though I've always wondered whether we can really say we are in transition or we are in transition without a transition. I don't know how we will define it. Why would I say that? Because for a transition to take place, we need to actually see steps forward from where we were to where we are moving into the future. And you'll agree with me, we are in a transition because we have removed a leader. But we are not in a transition because we have not removed the system. Mugabe is gone, but the Mugabeism is with us. That's the tough task confronting us as Zimbabweans as we try to engage in dialogue, and I don't know whether we will succeed or not. And one unfortunate thing about Zimbabwe is that dialogue has always been used as a means of last resort. We fall back on dialogue when all else has failed. When we have tried the other mechanisms and find that they are not working, we then suddenly remember, we can have dialogue. Taking you through the steps, I will start with the National Policy of Reconciliation of 1980. A policy that was pronounced by the Prime Minister, ostensibly with the aim of encouraging interracial, inter-party dialogue cooperation, etc. But to me, it was a hollow policy. Because it was not based on anything. It was just based on a word of mouth, with no structures in place, with no philosophy or ideology guiding it. That's why it failed. And second, you agree with me that the policy of reconciliation brought about a temporary peace between the nationalists and the former colonizers, the whites. But that peace was then utilized by one side of the nationalists to entrench their hegemony, to subordinate the other part of the nationalists. The policy of reconciliation provided ZANU-PF with the room to entrench its dominance over PF-ZAPU. Freud will agree with me, the Guzura, whose denouement or whose end was characterized by an adoption, incorporation, and subordination of the latter. I know most of us here have said and will say, Sakinywa. Akubanga lokubumbana, belokubambana. What does Sakinywa? That's why I'm talking about incorporation and subordination. So instead of a process of dialogue that is holistic and that creates sustainable structures, that policy, that process only enabled an entrenchment of the former colonial oppressive processes, this time in different hands. The first step of dialogue has failed. As I've already highlighted, it was used to promote, or ostensibly to try to promote inter-regional relations. Then, after the Unit Accord, 22 December 1987, suddenly, a wild animal rears its head on the Zimbabwean political landscape, calls for one party state. Monopartism is suddenly a real threat to us. Why? Because the PF-ZAPU, which was ostensibly the only challenge to the hegemon of ZANU-PF, has been incorporated. Now we can go it our way towards one party state. Suddenly we abandon the policy of reconciliation and we now talk unity, national unity, patriotism, belonging. And we can only have national unity if we all belong to the party. So the only way to go for us is a one-party state. Because we all belong together. We all died for this country, some will say. So we should move together as one party. Which, as we all know, was challenged by the late two-boy Edgar Zwanai. And from that moment, the violence that had been characteristic of the 1980s raised its head once again. The 1990 elections were very violent. Kombai was maimed. His assailants were convicted and pardoned. Which is one issue that has been very problematic about our political process in Zimbabwe. The promotion of impunity. The use of collective amnesia, the use of clemency orders across the political spectrum, promoting impunity that way. Once power had been consolidated by ZANU-PF after the Unit Accord, you will find that there was a reluctance to open up to any processes that would actually in any way threaten a central power base. In other words, what we are here for national dialogue was a taboo. Because national dialogue means I should converse with those who don't like me. But those who don't like me are a threat to my stranglehold on a central power base. And this power base, you will agree with me, was a power base that was constructed largely through coercion and violence, which had been a feature of the liberation movement. So it was continued in the post-colonial. Remember, I mentioned 4 epochs of violence: the pre-colonial, the colonial, the liberation struggle, and the post-colonial. So whenever we gather as Zimbabweans, we are trying to undo the effects of 4 different epochs of violence. And I don't know if we will be up to the task or not. And as a result of the fact that we have got a political leadership that was born, bred, and battered in violence, they do not have any proclivity or capacity at all towards consensual governance. It's either you are with us or you are not with us. That is why our slogan is Pambili Law, Pansi Law. And if you ask Uba we are doing Pansi Law, which one? It means 6 feet underground. That's what it means. So the slogan itself is a characterization of violence. So in that regard, 1998, the food riots, we all know what happened. The hardships confronting Zimbabweans. 1999 September, Zimbabweans say enough is enough. A labor-backed opposition movement comes into the picture. The strongest challenge ever to ZANU-PF. And the rest is history. The only thing that we do is to resort to default mode. And the default mode is violence. And on that note, I would want to highlight some key issues that have been omitted in our processes, that would have made the processes a success. Number one, as I've already highlighted, inclusivity is a necessity. We failed on that one. Our processes have not been inclusive. Number two, for dialogue to succeed, there is need for political commitment and political will. And on our part, in our case, the political will and the commitment has not been there. As I've already highlighted, dialogue has been a strategy of last resort. When everything else has failed, we then say, let's talk. Most crucial, for national dialogue to succeed, it should be embedded in larger change processes. National dialogue should never be taken in isolation. It should be part of a process of change. It should be part of a gamut of processes and initiatives. But in our case in Zimbabwe, that has not been the case. Our dialogue has always been politically oriented. So, because of that, you find that our processes lack depth. They will not take us anywhere because they are shallow. They are about individual ownership of positions and offices, not about the national good. Dialogue needs independent, credible facilitators. And on that note, we have not had that in Zimbabwe. That's why you have had accusations being traded across. Mbeki is pro-ZANU, Zuma is pro-MDC, etc. We have lacked that credibility, that independence in our facilitators. And our processes have not been a success. So what are our prospects for the future? Number one, like I've already said, we are in a transition, we are not a transition. And to put it in Masipula's tallest words, we are in a blocked transition. And the only way out of that is innovation. But innovation cannot come where there is entrenchment of positions. Innovations cannot come where there are fragmented voices calling for change. Where ZANU-PF is entrenching its position, the opposition is fragmenting. Civil society is pinpointing at each other and trading accusations of being bought, selling out, etc. So we are unable to speak with one voice. Because we are unable to speak with one voice, we can never achieve the change that we desire. Our government tends to like talking to itself rather than to its people. I thank you.
He has raised a number of issues, extremely thought-provoking in my view. I'll open this for discussions. Questions, if you think you need answers to what is just said. Observations, comments.
Thank you. I was just thinking about how you mentioned that we are back where we were, where we've been before. But I'm wondering if there's any silver lining you see as a possibility of what we've learned and can apply for us to go back forward and never come back this time around.
I need something that will come up from the presenter. He said we are in a blocked transition. What is it that is supposed to be done?
My name is Transitional. I'm seeking clarity on the issue of Mugabe is gone, but Mugabe is here. Mugabe is with us. I'm seeking clarity on that one.
I'll start from the bottom going up, meaning last question first. When I allude to the fact that Mugabe is gone, but Mugabe is with us, I am saying that, yes, we have a new president, but the system, the structures, the policies that we inherited from the old men are still part and parcel of our social, political, and economic fabric. That's basically what I'm saying. That's why I'm saying nothing has changed. We've only seen a change in the face, but not in systems. What needs to be done, seeing that we're in a block transition? Like I highlighted in my conclusion, the need for dialogue has never been more urgent than it is now. Why am I saying that? You will agree with me. We have had disputed elections in the past. We have had prices increases in the past. We have had demonstrations, stay-aways, but we have never witnessed the level of violence that we are witnessing now. And that clearly shows and tells you that we are close to the tipping edge. I am a student of conflict studies. And I'm looking at a scenario where we are actually reaching what I would call the peak of our situation. We cannot go beyond where we are. Because where we are, the only way from there is down here. So the way out of where we are is dialogue and dialogue. And that dialogue should be a credible, sincere, transparent dialogue. Not a dialogue characterized by hide and seek, umakachelana. We don't need that as a country. We need a dialogue that is rooted in a desire to see Zimbabwe moving again. In a desire to see Zimbabwe moving from being a basket case to being a grain basket. The first question is saying, have any lessons been learned? And to address that question from my view, I would say Zimbabwe is that type of a child whose parents provide everything necessary. They buy all the books. They send the child to the best school. They provide all the extra tuition necessary. But the child has got no zeal to utilize that chance and that opportunity. In other words, I'm saying we've been through a lot, but it seems we have learned nothing. Why am I saying that? Had we really learned, we would not have had elections in 2018 for starters. We would have let the GNU continue until we would have reached a point of sustainable stabilization. But because of our political egos as a nation, and when I say as a nation, I mean you and I, we were so eager to see our party winning elections, and we rushed into elections. And we undid everything that had been done in the 4 years from 2009 to 2018. So lessons have been there. Learning has taken place, but the learning has not been internalized. Thank you.
Any more takers?
I remember ZANU-PF said it cannot reform itself out of power. So how can you dialogue with somebody who believes in that?
Thank you, Mr. Yasmin. The first one, the question goes, if ZANU-PF say they cannot reform themselves out of power, how do you dialogue with such people? My answer to that will come from a very funny end. Dialogue is possible with anyone. What is needed is a leadership capability across the political divide. Number one. Number two, what is needed is coalition building across the political divide. Number three, the critical mass that my sister there alluded to. And to highlight the probability and the possibility of that, I want to take you to the cooperative process. You will all agree with me. Mukosi, Mangwana, and Mwanzora had a very brilliant working relationship. And they came from 3 different political parties. That clearly shows you that across the political divide, coalitions can be built. And those coalitions can be the nucleus upon which we build our time. The problem, unfortunately, that we have is that in all our political parties, the woks always carry the day, the hardliners. The reformists are either pushed out or cowed into submission. But the possibility of dialogue is there, starting with coalitions across the political divide, the building of a leadership capability and a critical mass. And most significantly, in line with that, you'll find that one reason why our dialogical processes are failing is that they are not built on any expert platforms. Our negotiators, or whatever we can call them, go into dialogue without any expert backup. So what they do is to just talk ideology. They don't really go to the crux of the matter, because there is no analytic untangling of issues behind the scenes. But if we can actually cross that, anything is possible. What needs to be done to lead to dialogue? As a student of peace and conflict studies, I like 2 men, unfortunately both of them non-African. And there's one African that I almost like. I like Mahatma Gandhi. I like Martin Luther King Jr. And I almost like Mandela. Why do I like those 2 and almost like Mandela as the 3rd one? Is their steadfast hold onto principles and practices of non-violence. The problem that we have as Zimbabweans, I'll quote one eminent scholar in peace studies called Rosaski, who says that human beings try non-violence for 1 week, and when it fails, they go back to violence which has failed for centuries. That's where our biggest undoing is. Look at the so-called shutdown. Why were we looting? You were looting. Why? We resorted to violence. We thought it was a time to fix them. But did any of those shop owners participate in the fuel price increase? For us to bring about a dialogue, let's resort to non-violent strategies. And there are 197 of them, according to Jimmy Sharp, a scholar of non-violence. But we have not followed them. We always want to toy and pick stones. We are resorting to violence. Let's create a critical mass of non-violence adherence. Let's strategize non-violently and push our leaders in courts to proper, sincere dialogue.
Our next presenter is going to be Yasmin Sooka. Please come forward.
Thank you and good evening. I was asked to reflect really on national dialogue processes that have taken place across the world and to look at what could be lessons learned for Zimbabwe. This question of national dialogues have emerged in many different parts of the world. So I think the big questions, and some of those have come up already, how are national dialogues prepared? What are the institutions and mechanisms required to set the groundwork for the national dialogue? In your case, you already have the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission, which has been given the authority by the government to actually start with this national dialogue process. Another key question, of course, is how is this going to be different from what you've done before? Who designs them? Who's going to conduct them? What are the different institutions and mechanisms required? How are you going to set them up in practice? And what should be considered when this is happening? And so those are some of the questions. And then finally, what should it look like? Yes, you can talk. But at the end of the day, when you arrive at certain outcomes, what's going to happen to them? How do they feed into a national legislative process? How do they take you from where you are to where you want to be? And that really ought to be the point of conversation. Where you want to be, and how does the national dialogue get you to that point? You may have had President Mugabe leave power, but in effect, was there a real change? So in South Africa, what we had was the National Peace Accord, which was represented at many, many different levels. So you had a peace council at the top, you had something at a province, you had something at a local level. And what was interesting about that was that it allowed one to almost monitor what was going on the ground, and at the same time lift it up to the top so that measures could be put in place to avoid future violence. So if one thinks about the period here in Zimbabwe before the last election, 2 weeks before the elections I was here, and already there was a sense that in the rural areas you had soldiers moving in. Already there was a whole question around the ballot list and the ballot, the election voters' roll. And so already the potential for violence existed there. But the question was, where were you taking that to resolve those questions? And so in the case of Zimbabwe, I think there really is an important point. Having a national dialogue is one thing, but how are you going to deal with the violence that is sure to break out as different parties try to increase their support or in fact to stifle alternative voices that may come up? And I think this is something, the question of monitoring and being able to lift the issue up so that something can happen beforehand. Another important issue from the South African perspective was we also brought in many international observers. And through the churches, we had an ecumenical monitoring mission that didn't come in just a week before the elections, but actually came in periods of 6 months before the elections took place, living amongst communities, so that in fact, not only did you have someone locally or domestically saying there's a potential for violence, but you also had someone internationally who could lift their voices, not just to the peace accord, but could also call people out internationally to say, this is what's actually happening on the ground. And then you have the human rights lawyers who say, can you imagine what it does to us as a movement if we allow them all to get away without any accountability? And so what do they say? They craft the language, it's very lyrical if you read it, and they talk about how to bridge the divisions of the past, and in fact, on the basis of building this new bridge, amnesty is going to be the bridge. But the ANC is very smart. They say, well, actually none of us here are elected. We don't enjoy the support of our people until we test it in the elections. So why don't we look at the content of the amnesty provision when the new government comes to power? And in fact, I think Tobias, you mentioned Jean-Paul Lederach in his seminal work around conflict transformation. He said you can have no peace that is sustainable without an acknowledgement of what has happened. And it is only when that acknowledgement happens, and that acknowledgement is converted into a public acknowledgement by the state of what has happened, that is the moment when societies move. Without those processes of disclosure and truth, you cannot have forgiveness. And a state can never forgive on your behalf. And so we tried to formulate that in the law that came about to set up the Truth Commission. At some point, the former National Party introduced secrecy clauses, and they said the processes of the Truth Commission should take place in secret. And we went to Parliament and we said no. And as a result of that, the process of the Truth Commission, which was unique in the world at the time, public hearings, an amnesty process in which victims would come forward and they could oppose the amnesty process. And in fact, perpetrators had to apply individually, voluntarily, and they had to make a full disclosure. But another example of a national dialogue was one that took place in Mali. In Mali, of course, in 1990, you had civil society activists who were really tired of this military regime. And in fact, they took to the streets to demonstrate against them. But the turning point came when the unions actually joined the protesters on the street and in fact held a series of demonstrations. And of course what followed was 3 days of some of the most awful violence that took place in Mali, in which more than 150 people died over the 3-day period. And in fact, the dissatisfaction grew with the regime and the armed forces. And finally, 15 officers from the army, and I think that's an interesting question to ponder, to think that you don't have forces that are homogenous. We always, and recently today, I think there was a report that there are many in the army who are dissatisfied with what they see happening. And so 15 army officers overthrew the military regime. And in fact, in a coup d'etat with civil society actors, they formed an interim government. And as part of the interim government, the first thing they did was they initiated a national dialogue, which in fact was one of the most inclusive in the world, and which led then to, in fact, the elections and a new government. So the Malians were able to move from a military regime to free and fair elections, and the national dialogue provided the frame for that. But the important thing about the national dialogue there was that it provided almost from the outset that it should give rise to free and fair elections, that there should be a new constitution on which there would be a referendum. And so they provided for outcomes and the implementation of outcomes. And that's, I think, one of the lessons there. But how do you expect people who are in their 60s and 70s. They're making decisions for a new generation that is living on a completely different trajectory. Are we then surprised that so many of the policies that they make don't actually take into account a new young generation? If you consider that 65% of people under 35 are in our region, show me one country where you have 65% of the elected who are under 35. That's the contradiction, and that's something we need to look at. The other big question is, what do you do with the government, military players, civil society organizations, the religious organizations and professional bodies? In the South African context, they were represented in the context of South Sudan, Tunisia. They were represented because you want them in the process. You don't want them outside of the process, because then they become spoilers. And in South Africa, you will remember the IFP and the right wing, right up until the elections. They were outside of the process. And in fact, the night before we were going to elections, we had to go and change the ballot paper to put the photograph of Kachabu Tulesi on the ballot paper. But you know the kind of craziness it created, because suddenly people had to be told that they could now vote from this political party. So the spoilers, they have to be in and not out. There are also strategic considerations. I mean, the decision makers or people who have power. Often the people who are sitting at the table are not the ones where the real power is being made. So for instance, Mr. de Klerk, when he sat at the table, after Boy Patong, he needed the ANC more than they needed him, because he had lost control of the security forces and of the right wing, and suddenly he desperately needed the negotiations to work. So there was a tipping point, and that's something one has to consider. How do you make sure that the real players are at the table? Case in point, Constant Falun. He was the right-wing commander and he was outside of the process. And it was only after the right wing were involved in a bruising set of attacks on the border that suddenly they found the space to come in. And so it's a mapping process that you need to make, which is who are the different constituencies, but who are the important people who should be in that process? Who are the potential spoilers, and how do we bring them in? And so this is something it's not a process between two groups of people, but rather between a whole range of them. People ask how long this should last. Some cases lasted a week. In others, it lasted for more than a year. And in the case of Nepal and Yemen, it lasted for more than a 2-year period, and then the process was extended. So you already have an NPRC whose mandate initially was 10 years, and of which some period has already begun to run. And so the question for you is, in the next 4 years, how do you maximize that opportunity and time to achieve what you want to have out of the process? Lessons learned mapping, I think, is an important one. Also the question of how do you resolve disputes between different groupings without affecting the whole process. And that's where I think the CODESA process is very, very helpful. The question of participation and outreach. In many countries, people don't even know that these processes are taking place. They don't know what the mandate of these bodies are. And so this is an important issue. How do you get the word out there? Because everybody needs to be able to say, this is about us, and if we don't add our voices to it, then it's going to be a problem. And this was the beauty of the constitution-making process in South Africa, that the Constitutional Assembly did an enormous amount of public outreach, but also lots of plays, drama. They use cultural theatre groups, and we all have to look at what is common to our context. In Sierra Leone, for instance, they have an oral culture. So what was the thing that went around? It was called the Beating Drums Drama Group, and they went out. There were also enormous community radio stations that took the messages out. But somebody has to take responsibility for it. And for any national dialogue process to work, you need to make sure that you build in those features. The question of agreed mechanisms for the implementation of outcomes. If you don't have that, you will have a talk shop and nothing will evolve from it. So these are some of the, I think, lessons learned from many of the processes. I have a host of case studies in here. I will leave my PowerPoint presentation behind. You will see it's a paper there that I gave to the organizers. And that's really, every country has its own context. You can only learn from the others on what perhaps worked. The biggest ingredients are leadership, ownership, inclusiveness, and making sure that you have institutional mechanisms that support the dialogue, and that finally the outcomes will be implemented. And of course, you need to be able to say how to bring government into a process in which you level the playing fields, because if they think they can dictate it, then the process is doomed almost from the outset. Thank you.